Let's cut to the chase, have an honest conversation, and develop real answers. As a matter of fact, with Andrew Cuomo. Hello, welcome back to As a Matter of Fact. I'm Andrew Cuomo. Well, there is a lot going on all across the country, all across the globe, and none of it good, frankly. We received a lot of questions, but you see the same basic questions being asked over and over again, and I'd like to address those today. The first question is, what do you think about the situation in Israel? How did we get here, and what happens going forward? I wish I knew all the answers, but let's answer it in two parts. How did we get here, and then going forward? First, a disclaimer of my bias. I am pro-Israel. I have always been pro-Israel. My father was pro-Israel. My family is pro-Israel. I have two brothers-in-law who are Jewish. As governor, I was probably the most active elected official on behalf of Israel. I've traveled to Israel after Israel was attacked while I was governor, because that's when you want to see people show up when it's hard. I was the only elected American official to travel to Auschwitz to celebrate or remember the 75th anniversary of the freeing of Auschwitz. The anti-Semitism has been a growing phenomenon. The numbers have been staggering, and they have been for years. This is nothing new in some ways. The support for Israel among Democrats has been dropping for years. The pro-Palestinian movement has been growing for years. This past summer, we saw Democrats who are quote-unquote pro-Palestinian demonstrating against Israel. The House had to pass a resolution that basically affirmed the House support for Israel because you had so many members who were saying negative things about Israel, apartheid government, racist government. And this has been troubling because Israel, in some ways, has been subjected to a double standard. When people oppose the policies of Israel, it's a very fine line to anti-Semitism. And there have been policies that you can oppose that Israel's current administration has pursued. Prime Minister Netanyahu has advanced, quote-unquote, judicial reform that many people, including myself, would say is not a reform at all, but actually a step backwards. The current Israel administration is very far to the right. But in the case of Israel, opposing governmental policies is often blurred with anti-Semitism. And that phenomenon is unique to Israel in this regard. When we have an American government that has policies that people oppose, let's say when President Trump was in office and put children in cages on the border, and those pictures went worldwide, I'm sure many people sat back and said, how can America's government do that, put children in cages? And they opposed Trump's policies, but they weren't anti-American. There was a separation between what a current administration did, the policies of a current administration, and the people of that country. In the case of Israel, it seems we too often blend the two together. I oppose Benjamin Netanyahu's judicial reform, and that then bleeds into anti-Semitism. And that's unfair. Judicial reform, by the way, even in Israel, was opposed by the people of Israel. It was the function the belief of an administration opposed by the people. So that's one phenomenon that has been going on. Second, more and more, we forget history. So much of society is current, and is if it's not on Twitter, it didn't happen. And if you can't get it into 100 characters, it's not communicated. And we forget, or too many of us forget, the Holocaust, and forget the plight of the Jewish community, and why and how Israel was formed in the first place, and the desperate situation of the 14 million Jewish people globally. Only 14 million Jewish people. That is lost. And we've also blurred the distinction between pro-Palestinian and Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization that has been brutal to the Palestinian people. If you are pro-Palestinian, you should be anti-Hamas with a vehemence, because Hamas has victimized the Palestinian people. Yes, they're anti-Israel, but they also victimize their own people. And Israel's policies at the end of the day, writ large, they are an American ally, and they are the most democratic government in the region. So it was always in America's interest to ally with Israel. And the Democratic Party's distancing from Israel has been troubling to me, but it has been happening over a period of years. I started an organization called Progressive Democrats for Israel, and the name was provocative. And many people said, no, progressive Democrats are pro-Palestinian. They're not pro-Israel. And I argue that point. That's why I said progressive Democrats for Israel. If you are a progressive Democrat, in my opinion, you are pro-Israel. You can differ with policies. You can differ with the Netanyahu administration. You can differ with judicial reform. You can even differ with the progress that has been made, quote unquote, peace process that has been made. You can say Israel has not been aggressive enough on a two-state solution. You can say all of that. But progressive Democrats are still pro-Israel, again, in my opinion. You can be pro-Palestinian and not anti-Israel. You can take the position that we have to move towards a two-state solution. We have to be more aggressive, and Israel has not been aggressive enough. But that doesn't make you anti-Israel. It doesn't make you especially anti-Semitic. And that has all morphed together over the past few years. And that's why you see anti-Semitism increasing in this country year to year. You see more Democrats saying, I'm pro-Palestinian, defining it as anti-Israel. And that has been increasing year over year. You've also seen Democrats who were just blatantly anti-Semitic and said blatantly anti-Semitic remarks that were too easily excused, I believe, by the Democratic Party. If you said, I'm anti-Black as a Democratic elected official, the response from the Democratic establishment would not be, well, we're a big tent party, and you apologized, and it's okay. Let's take a picture together and come to the conference and visit the White House. If you said you were anti-LGBTQ, the response would not be, well, we're a big tent party, and you're a good overall, you're a good person. No, rightfully so, the Democratic Party would condemn those remarks, and they should. They were not as aggressive or vociferous when someone made anti-Semitic comments. And that was also troubling. So that was all up until today. Second part of the question, what happens going forward? I think when Hamas attacked, you saw a moment of unity that was rare and welcome. President Biden stepped up, said, we are with Israel shoulder to shoulder, because what Hamas did was so atrocious, so savage, that it transcended any reasonable political debate or difference. The brutal attack, how they treated women and children, was just a level of barbarism that appalled the world. And in that moment, you had unity. Since then, it has become increasingly more complicated for Israel, and I believe the complications will only get worse. And now the "are you pro-Israel" position is going to become more complicated. The question of humanitarian aid going into Gaza. You'll see more and more stories about how the people of Gaza are suffering and why. And why wouldn't you send humanitarian aid? And there'll be recriminations on Israel's position on humanitarian aid. I think if you factor it forward, there'll be recriminations on the U.S. position on humanitarian aid if it's not responsive to the situation, because that is a legitimate issue. The hostage release. Is there a possibility to release the hostages? And is Israel's aggression foreclosing a hostage release? That will be a situation that will continue to develop. And I think looking forward, Israel has to be cognizant that it's playing on two different chessboards. Yes, a military strategy that ends Hamas as a threat to Israel and a threat to Palestine and a threat to the world. That is Israel's prime focus. But there's also a second focus, which is as you are pursuing that goal, there are legitimate concerns about the humanitarian aid for people in Gaza and ancillary damage, corollary damage, and what are you doing to reduce that? And that is a real concern that is going forward. Can we get the hostages released? And should we be focusing on that first before Israel moves forward? That is a legitimate issue. And globally, all the forces that had united momentarily behind Israel because of the Hamas savagery will become vocal on the humanitarian aid and the hostage issue. And I think Israel has to be aware of that. I think you'll see the Biden administration become more and more aware of those concerns, because the humanitarian aid concerns, the hostage concerns will continue to increase as areas of concern for people globally. So going forward, the balance of Israel eliminating Hamas and the humanitarian aid for the people in Gaza, the hostage release, that is a very, very delicate balance. And it's primarily in Israel's control. But you will see, and you are seeing, countries around the world now using those issues to define their position. You've seen the U.S. policy changing. We're now suggesting a pause in activities by Israel to allow humanitarian aid. Russia's calling for a ceasefire to allow humanitarian aid. The U.S. is not going that far. They're saying a pause to allow humanitarian aid. But this is going to be an ongoing discussion. And the near universal support that you saw for Israel in the aftermath of the attack, you will see diminish and wane and move more and more towards curbing Israel's aggression for the hostages and for humanitarian aid. I think that's where you're going to see this situation evolve. But again, that's just looking at the facts today, and the facts change every day. Also, the situation overall is frightening, and it's frightening for everyone, because the big question is, could this trigger a greater conflict? Could Hezbollah get involved and Iran get involved? And could this trigger a domino effect of forcing other players to take different positions? And that is what keeps many of us up at night, and it should, because you could see that happening very, very easily. So the nuance going forward for Israel's strategy, I think, is very, very important. I understand from the Israel perspective, if you look at what public opinion says in Israel, they suffered this attack. There is very little sympathy for Hamas, which is understandable. And there is an aggressive attitude towards the response. And while the rest of the world, I think, has more sympathy for the humanitarian aid side and the hostage release priority. So that will be unfolding. And we'll continue to watch it and see how it goes. But we'll also pray for peace, and we'll pray for reasonableness, even in the face of the brutality. Because we are in treacherous times. And there will be countries that look to exploit this situation and this issue for their own agenda. So this is really a time of analysis and not just emotion, intelligence and not just emotion. And I pray that we find it. Next question. What are your thoughts on the House Speaker race? There seems to be no resolution in sight. This is the Speaker race, which is primarily a question for the Republicans in Congress. They have tried every combination, and I don't see what the resolution is. Frankly, I don't believe there's a resolution until the next election, because the margin is just too thin. A speaker needs 217 votes out of 221, and you have a significant number of extremists in the Republican conference, and that number of extremists are so difficult and so unreasonable that they can't even find resolution with their own party. And just think about this. Yes, I'm a Democrat. Government is about compromise. It always has been. It always will be. I'm a person of principle. I'm a person of zealot belief in certain democratic principles. Yes. But what we've always understood in this country is to move forward, you must compromise at times, or you can hold on to your principles, but be paralyzed. And we are socially divided, politically polarized, to the point of political paralysis. Democrats compromising with Republicans in the House. Forget it, because the Republicans can't even compromise with the Republicans. That's how bad the situation is. They can't control their own members. They can't find common ground among themselves. And that's the story of Republican Party in chaos, where you can't even come to terms with your own family. And I don't see it getting better. I think when they elect a speaker, because of the rules they put in place, you're now going to have this constant churning of who's in charge. And it will be caused by the extremes in the Republican Party versus what you would call moderates. But I don't think it's really moderates. I think it's reasonable people who are capable of compromise. But this is the mishigas, they would say in New York, the craziness of the Republican Party. And I think you'll see one come up, and in a matter of time, that one will be disposed of, and this will continue to happen. I think it is a terrible commentary on the Republican Party and their ability to lead and their responsibility. I mean, if there was a time to put your individual ideology aside, the time would be now, right? They walk into their conference to pick a speaker. You have the Ukraine situation. You have the Israel situation, where Israel wants to know what's the position of the U.S. in terms of aid, et cetera. And even at this time, you can't figure out how to run your own house? Shame on you. Shame on you. And I think that's the message the American people are receiving. Next question is, I saw your follow-up interview with the migrant Jonathan. He seems to be doing his best he can to work and provide for his family. Do you think the migrant situation is under control, or is it still a major problem? We interviewed migrants a few months back, and then we revisited with Jonathan, who was one of the migrants who we had spoken to, because so much of our analysis, so much of our discussion is from the American federal government side. What's our position on the border, et cetera. I wanted to hear the story from the migrant side, and Jonathan's story was amazing. How he was committed to getting into this country because he thought it was the only opportunity for a better future for himself and his family, and how resilient and dedicated he was to that. Traveled for months, spent everything he could, traveled with his young daughter. He's now in New York. Jonathan said he's found a job, he's working, earning $150 a day, although he was less clear on whether that was 5 days a week and how steady that was, living in a shelter. I asked if he was earning income, could he then move out and get a place on his own? And if you're working, pay your own rent to alleviate the burden on the American taxpayer. And he said that the income wasn't that steady. And because his legal status is an asylum seeker, it was very hard to get any official bodies to sign with him, leases, et cetera. He's also been joined by his wife and his other children, and they're staying in a shelter in Queens. Is it under control? No. No. And this is another situation that we have only started to deal with. Asylum seekers are here. The immediate question is, who houses them? Who pays the cost? Who educates their children? Who provides health care? And in that regard, I think the federal government has basically punted the issue to the local governments, and they have had no management of where these migrants go. They go where they go, or they go where they get sent by the buses from Texas or from Florida. That is no way to manage this crisis. Second, immigration has always been a federal responsibility. And the federal government has to manage not just the border, but for the asylum seekers who come in, where they go, and they should be paying the cost, but not a city responsibility. Second to the federal government, I think the states should be stepping in and managing the situation. This is not a New York City problem. It's just not. Mayors have their sole prime responsibilities. Immigration is not one of them. And cities are already under tremendous pressure in this economy, in this post-COVID world. They are in the worst position to have to carry this burden. So number one, the federal government should be stepping up, and they're not. Number two, the state government should be stepping up, and it's not. And yes, it is overburdening cities all across this country, which are already struggling. Aggravating all of the above, this does not end quickly. First, you still have migrants coming. Second, the asylum seekers are now have legal hearings that they have to go through. The legal hearing process can be deferred 2, 3, 4 years before they get their first hearing date because the backlog is so great. That means they'll be in asylum seeker status 2, 3, 4 years until they get a hearing. Then they'll either be successful or unsuccessful. But this is a long timeline. For uncertainty, this is a long timeline to be paying the cost of millions of migrants by cities that are already under tremendous financial stress. So, no, it's not under control. It hasn't been managed well. We're not at the end. This is going to be a prolonged period. And we're not even addressing or discussing realistic solutions. It's become a political football. Everybody wants to hand it to someone else. Right now, there's the belief politically that the mayors have assumed responsibility, and that's fine by the federal officials and the state officials, because if the mayor's responsible, they're not. And I think the migrant issue is so politically charged that the fear that drives many elected officials says, stay away, right? They talk about the third rail in politics. Stay away from controversial issues. Yeah, I know. But the controversial issues tend to be the important ones. And they tend to be the ones that actually need resolution. And I understand the political instinct, stay away from controversial problems. But that is directly at odds with the responsibility and the oath of what it means to be an effective elected official. You are there to solve problems, and especially solve the difficult problems, right? The difficult problems should be number one on your priority list, not the last one on your list, because it's politically threatening to you. Next question. Crime seems like it is out of control across the country. What do you think needs to be done? Crime out of control. I don't know that crime is ever really in control, right? It's degrees of how well we're managing the problem. Crime out of control across the country. It's still more of an urban problem, always has been, probably always will be, than a rural problem. It's a suburban issue, especially in the metropolitan regions around urban centers, because those suburban communities commute in, they're more integrated with the urban core. So it's a suburban, urban more than rural, and mostly within the inner cities. And it is a problem all across the country. You see it in LA, you see it in San Francisco, you see it in Seattle, you see it in Chicago, you see it in New York. It is more of a political issue for the Democratic Party. And this one has confounded me. It's the Democratic Party that is trying to come to terms with its own extremes, because there are extreme left zealots in the Democratic Party, not to the extent that the Republican Party has an extreme right, but we have an extreme left that has not been rationalized since the George Floyd moment, which was a triggering situation in this nation, as it should be. The defund the police movement was born from the George Floyd moment. And that defund the police theory, which I believe is incredibly naive, to say the least. But the Democratic Party has had trouble rationalizing that far-left defund the police movement with an effective strategy on crime. And again, in an age of sound bites and zealotry, nuance, rationality loses. And it has lost on the issue of crime for the Democratic Party, at a great cost to the Democratic Party politically, but even worse, at a great cost to the people who live in those cities, et cetera. Defund the police makes no sense. The victims of crime overwhelmingly are black and brown. 70 to 80% of the victims of crime are black and brown. So it's easy for the elitists who live in a high-rise with a doorman and a security guard to have a great theoretical position on crime, because they have their own protective systems by design. The people who pay the price are the poor people who are in a position where they don't have the added protections. So it has to be a realistic situation and solution. We had first black mayor in New York City's history was a gentleman named David Dinkins, beautiful man on many, many levels. And he came into New York City, and there was a crime problem on the cycle of crime out of control. It was a high level of crime. What did Mayor Dinkins do, the first black mayor in New York City's history? He increased police by 52%. 52% increase in police. He never got the credit for it, and his successor was Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who actually had the benefit of David Dinkins' action, because it took time to onboard that number of police. But he increased police 52%. How do you square that with defund the police? You don't. You don't. Mayor Dinkins was insensitive to the black community. He was the first black mayor. No, he understood the facts, which were 70 to 80% of the victims of crime are black and brown. The George Floyd moment should teach us a lesson, that we need a different type of police and a different type of policing system not just one that is more sensitive, racially attuned, one that can work better with the community, one which is more socially responsible, one which is slower to violence. That's only the beginning of it. I think we should take a broader view of the reforms we need. Our policing system is basically the same system from the 1800s. The answer to these 911 calls today are not always send a police officer with a gun. As a matter of fact, the minority of 911 calls actually require a police officer with a gun. So let's talk about a different design for public safety. Let's not even use the word police first. Let's call it a public safety function. And let's look at the system from the beginning and say, let's do a triage of what those 911 calls actually are asking for. Because dealing with a homeless mentally ill person is much different than dealing with a domestic violence situation or a disruptive group of young people or gang activity, right? These are very different situations, and they require different levels of skill and expertise in those areas. And let's deploy people who have that set of skills for those particular problems. Yes, of course, there will always be 911 calls where the appropriate response is going to be a police officer with a gun, but not always. And, you know, the old expression, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When everything is when you only have a gun in your tool belt, that's one response. But mental health training, domestic violence training, substance abuse training, dispute resolution training. Remember, a police officer today, you receive about 6 months of academy training. They then give you a gun and tell you, go out and handle the problems of the world and society and the vast array of issues that you're going to deal with. That's almost an impossible situation. So let's take a step back and say, we learned more from the George Floyd moment than, quote unquote, defund the police would suggest. We learned that you actually need to redesign the policing system itself and be smarter and more analytical and provide the emergency response that is appropriate to that situation. That's what the Democratic Party should be talking about, in my opinion. They've gone the other way, and they just don't want to talk about it. It's fraught with political dissension, so just don't talk about it. Yeah, that is never the answer. That is never the answer. Well, it's too tough to deal with, so I'm going to ignore it. You never solve a problem in life that you deny. Acknowledgement is always the first step towards a solution. That's in government, that's in politics, that's in life. And the Democratic Party has been too silent, too inactive on the issue of crime, and it's hurting those communities who have to deal with the problem most. Next question. Jets versus Giants this Sunday. Who do you root for when it's New York versus New York? I root for New York. New York, we're in football season. New York has 3 football teams: the Jets, the Giants, and the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills, I spent a tremendous amount of time and energy, and the state has a great investment in the Buffalo Bills because there was a moment where we were going to lose the Bills. where the ownership changed and there was a very real threat that the Bills would leave Buffalo and go to another city. And I was frantic working to keep the Bills in Buffalo. And we were successful with that. And the Bills have extraordinary talent. Josh Allen is the quarterback, and they've been very exciting to watch and very hopeful that they're going to do great things this season. They've had their ups and downs, but their level of talent is undeniable. Jets, Giants, there was a regional alliance when you get to downstate New York. The Jets played in Queens originally, and I'm from Queens. So Long Island, Queens, you had a natural alliance with the Jets. And I could ride my bike to watch the Jets. Joe Namath was the Jets, right? But Giants, Jets, Bills, I root for them all. Giants, Jets game, I can't lose because as long as the New York team wins, I win. I have a non-political question for you. Great. What do you think of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's budding romance? I think, God bless them. They are two highly successful people, highly attractive personalities, and if they are in love, God bless. And I wish them nothing but good. It is fascinating to watch how the effect of this, I think that probably the greatest benefactor of this relationship so far has been the NFL, which has seen a tremendous level of interest and frankly has advertised the relationship in a way that has worked for them. But it's added a love affair to Sundays in the NFL that I don't think I've ever seen anything like before. So my best to them. Travis Kelce's a great player. Taylor Swift is obviously a phenomenon as an entertainer. And the NFL is the big winner. So we'll see what happens. Okay, that's it for this week. Let's say a prayer. Let's hope that our elected officials and leaders around the world think very carefully about the steps they take these next few days, especially with the Israel situation, because this is precarious, and these are precarious days. And when people say, well, politics, government matters. It matters, and it matters now. You have a good week. Thank you very much.